Welcome. Welcome everyone to 144A. This is today's kit. Look to the side of the box. Make sure you're tasting that. And Madeline Triffon, take it away.
Cheers. And I stand, correctly and appropriately directed, not to tiptoe through the tulips, but to march with intent through this wine. Though I don't worry about Tim getting squished because he is the pro of pros. Cheers to everyone. I don't know if anyone's joining us for the first time, but you'll notice there's some questions to consider, and this will come up on all of the wines in case your mind wants something to hold on to. Is this wine lightly, moderately, or highly aromatic? Do you perceive any residual sugar or an illusion of sweetness? And then finally, I think a subject that interests me, fascinates me, the more and more I taste over the years is texture and mouthfeel. So Pearly Meng's beautiful expression. We are looking at the color against a white surface, and all of a sudden it's not white. It's like actually, the grid may show something different on MTW, but this is a really nice medium to medium light yellow. It's got some green glints to it that connote what? Youth. Those drop off with bottle age as a reminder. And aromatically, it is beautifully aromatic. For me, it is, at least in my glass at this time, and I poured this from the fridge about half an hour ago. So I gave it a little time to relax and to warm up slightly. So I think it's exactly the right temp. And I don't have to work at get the aroma at all. It is a combination of very forward, fresh flowers. Take your pick. Maybe honeysuckle and a little bit of citrus floral like lime blossom or lemon blossom. And then just singing alongside that is beautifully ripe, sweet citrus fruit, notably like Meyer lemon, that sweet, that illusion of sweetness in lemon, especially aromatically. Lime, and if lime were to be a Meyer lime, I would call it like a margarita, where you get a little blast of sweetness from the lime. Grapefruit, it's not super dominant, but it's in there, both pink and yellow grapefruit. And the whole impression of these citrus fruits is fresh and perfectly ripe. And actually, even aromatically, a little bit of bitterness, like you squeeze the skin and you're smelling the oil. And there is some very charming tropical fruit as well. For me, in this particular tasting, and I say that because wines incarnate differently whenever you open them, wherever you are, it's melon. It's really ripe cantaloupe and honeydew melon, and maybe something slightly more exotic, like guava or even a little bit of pineapple, but that's not strong. It's more really beautiful, ripe lemon, and there's a green element that marches hand in hand with the lime, like lemongrass or sorrel, verbena, that type of thing. It's a really attractive, very generous, very forward nose. I get a little bit of a salty character on it, but I'm not going to get married to that because I'd rather take it on the palate, and I'm going to do that right now. The attack, it's interesting. That first entry onto the palate, and the acidity is so prominent for me. I'm going to turn around and taste it again immediately, just so I can calm the acidity down. The second approach is always a little bit softer. So the acidity to me, if I have to quantify it, is medium plus, but definitely mouth-watering. This is a young, juicy white wine. Those ripe and sweet citrus fruits are absolutely mirrored on the palate. Meyer lemon, the margarita lime I was talking about, the floral aspect of it, it's like you're chewing fresh flowers, and it's a delight. A little bit of that tropical character in the form of whatever melon appeals to you, particularly honeydew or cantaloupe, and I probably throw honeydew in there because I'm eating a lot of it. What surprises me a little is there's more of what I would call a green expression in the form of herbs on the palate, fresh herbs, and also the saltiness that I got aromatically is very much expressed on the palate, particularly in the lingering finish. On the palate, it's sleeker. It's a little bit tighter. To me, the foreshadow of a white wine that can handle significant bottle age. But On the second taste, it also has mid-palate a very relaxed mouthfeel that then tightens up on the finish. So I get the impression of possibly extended lees contact, or maybe even neutral oak, certainly no new oak in this wine. So it has a strong minerality in that, and anybody who comes up with a better word than that, I'm giving them a fruitcake or something else if that doesn't sound appealing to them. So we can have an alternative to rocky minerality, but I'm defaulting to a salty expression. It is long and textural, both plump on the palate and lush from the leaves, and possibly and ripe oak and ripe fruit, and also possibly neutral oak, but then it finishes very clean and long due to the medium plus almost verging on high acidity. It's delicious, long, chewy. Here are options. So Pinot Grigio, aka Pinot Gris, Verdejo, Sauvignon Blanc blend, because it often has Semillon tucked in there, and other. And by the way, other is not a polite option. It is offered honestly for those of you who have realized, you know, this is a safe zone. If you don't think it's any three of these, then please vote for other, and tell us if you feel like it in the chat or in the Q&A what you think it might be. But we're ranging from Pinot Grigio, which is a relatively, you know, neutral, is sort of almost an insult to the grape because it's a noble grape. I would say not highly aromatic white variety. Verdejo can be highly aromatic and can often smell like Sauvignon Blanc, but especially if it's had Sauvignon Blanc melted into it. And then Sauvignon Blanc itself blend, which is by anyone's measure highly aromatic unless it's having a grumpy day. And then our options, 2 from the old world and 2 from the new, include Italy and Spain for Pinot Grigio and Verdejo, New Zealand and California for Sauvignon Blanc, though I'm sure there is Pinot Grigio grown there also, just not with as much enthusiasm.
So while we give everybody just about 30 seconds, I'm going to ask the first question here, Maddie, just to warm everybody up.
Please.
And it's the stupid question of the day.
Oh,
but
there are none. Yes.
So I get the acidity. That's a lot of it. And then it kind of opens up to a roundness.
Yes.
Is that is a mark of the variety?
It can be, and I think it's really cool. I mean, I find this texture really personally thrilling. I still get excited about this stuff because you can have prominent, however you want to call it. If you don't want to qualify it like medium plus, you can say it has prominent or palate cleansing or even racy acidity, particularly as it leans out into the finish. But when you hold it on your palate, mid-palate, it's positively plump and lush and rich. So it's got a combination of texture that's really neat, and they're not fighting against each other. It just speaks to a wine that has a richness to it. It's complex. You know, we mentioned different types of fruit, and I didn't even get into a wide variety of other fruits, but certainly tropical and sweet citrus, floral, big time, herbs, you know, salty minerality. And we have, are people voting with enthusiasm?
Yeah,
I hope
so this is about 64% participated. I'll let you guys off the hook. Let's try to get a 70 on the next round. It's anonymous, so you can. And I threw out my first question. So for those of you who have questions, please do.
And we have Verdejo
at 38%. Yep.
Yes. And then we've got Sauvignon Blanc blend, and then other, if anyone wants to come up front and tell us what other. But between Verdejo and Sauvignon Blanc, I think that's an honest little dance there. We've got a strong vote for Spain. The New World's coming in, you know, as the caboose, but it's not just a drip. And somebody's going to ask me the difference between the Verdejo expression and Sauvignon Blanc expression. And I will say that Sauvignon Blanc on its own merit would, you know, in my opinion, tends to dominate anything it's blended with. So you would, you know, possibly get a stronger, grassier, and more, you know, pushy expression of grapefruit. So Rebecca is saying Gruner Veltliner, excellent. Oh, that must be the other. And you know, Rebecca, every time I see Gruner anywhere in a blind tasting, I go, thank you for letting me taste another good expression of Gruner, and for my not having to blind taste it myself in a test, because it is a confusing variety, albeit certainly classic and noble by anybody's measure. You know, Gruner has the complexity that we're talking about in this wine. I don't personally get my own tags of maybe white radish, white pepper, lentil that comes to the fore with Gruner with regularity when they're rich, ripe expressions of it, but it's not to say it can't be. Thank you for your honesty. We're at Evan's house in San Francisco, I believe. We are getting on our plane, and we are going somewhere in the world. I'm not getting a lot of green notes, so that's what I'm going to choose Sauvignon Blanc, but I also seem to, and I didn't see what the rest of that is.
Often have
trouble identifying green notes. Well, they're not dominant. Remember, when I mention them, and I tend to, when I perceive a wine in a situation like this, I'll mention what strikes me immediately. So I'm not, you know, going through the grid in any specific order. When I'm tasting with you, I'm mentioning the things that hit me first. And when you go back to it, you might pick up more green notes that are melted in to the fruit and the floral. We are in Spain. We are in northwestern Spain. We are in a growing region, Rueda, that's right on the heels of Toro, that is as continental as it gets. It is wickedly continental. So we have, you know, very warm daytime temperatures during the summertime, and cold temperatures when they plummet at night. We are at the highest altitude in this growing region, which makes it all the more interesting compared to the rest. It's in the southeastern subzone, but what's dead cool about it, it is an area that was resistant to phylloxera because of its extraordinarily sandy soils. This particular Verdejo is 100%. So you can, I believe, on the superiores, you have to have at least 85%. Otherwise, they can blend up to 50% other grape varieties, which include Viura, Macabeo, and, wait for it, Sauvignon Blanc. But, you know, this grape variety, Verdejo, and this is a 2021, though I think the freshness of it, you know, it's acceptable for you to consider 2022. This is a producer called Bodegas Vatan that has their primary reputation for Toro red, and is within the Jorge Ordonez universe portfolio. It is absolutely, Kevin, nice and juicy. Tim's going to give us a suggestion for identifying the pyrazines and Sauvignon Blanc. If you hold the boat just for a minute, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about Rueda and Verdejo. This is a wine that is indeed barrel fermented. It's hand harvested and barrel fermented in neutral puncheons and demi-muid. And to remind us all, because I mix them up, 500 to 600 liter barrels. It gets extended lease contact, 12 months with batonnage, and there is an unforgiving landscape, right, in Castilla y León. And
It's like a moon.
Doesn't it? It really, I love landscapes like this. And don't those vines look at you like, go away, don't touch me, I'm doing a good job. Look at the sandy soils, I'm kicking out plenty of fruit. Don't mess with me. You know, I'm doing my job. So this is a grape that was always historically Rueda's pride and joy, but actually got nudged out by Palomino of all things for a period of time. But when it got its DO, it was sort of reintroduced as the native beautiful expression of white wine in this area. Sauvignon Blanc has long been allowable, and we can actually thank Bodegas Marqués de Riscal for celebrating what is sometimes referred to as Rueda's sleeping beauty, because they were the ones that released a white to show alongside their Rioja sometime back in the late 70s, I believe. I think this is a juicy, gorgeous wine. You know, I can still feel it. I still feel the mouthwatering acidity. I still remember that illusion of sweetness from the fruit, which I get when wines are really ripe. I remember the florality, and the minerality is, you know, a house on fire. How do you guys like it?
Tim, go
Tim,
ahead
you
for-
want to talk to the green aspect?
Yeah, you know, this is to me a really ripe style of Rueda, because the wines I'm used to are probably about 13.5% alcohol. But still, you know, this is interesting for this grape variety. It reminds me of a Certico because it shows here that it can get really ripe, but really maintain high acidity and be balanced. So yeah, it's delicious wine. This great photo of the legendary Jorge Ordonez there.
Oh, you know, I have to minimize the chat so I can see him. I can't see him, but you know, it's very interesting, isn't it? For a while, oh, there he is with a new hairdo. He had gotten a rep, and I think somewhat unfairly, for favoring more expressions of sort of New World influenced Spanish wines. But I think if you start exploring his portfolio these days, look at this. This has plenty of minerality, and it's also wine from an historic region.
Yeah.
I did a good job getting through wine number one, Li Meng.
You did.
Right.
Tim, do you want to talk about the Parisines?
Yeah, 30 seconds here. So listen,
Yeah.
everybody, you know, Sauvignon Blanc is, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of in its own inherent way, it's got a strong personality. And even with, as Maddie said, when you blend it with other grapes, it still doesn't matter. It sticks out. So, but the one thing that you have to get in terms of aromas and flavors is pyrazines. And pyrazines is a chemical compound, and to us, it smells like green bell pepper, right? So if you miss that, you're going to miss Sauvignon Blanc. So as your attorney, what I advise you to do, and you need to give your roommates a heads up that you're going to do this because they're going to share in your experiment, right? So you go buy a green bell pepper and you put it in a bowl and you put it in the refrigerator and you leave it. And at some point after a week, it's going to start to decompose. And when it does, you're going to open the refrigerator every time and you're going to be assaulted by pyrazines. And at some point, your brain is going to go over a threshold and you're going to get overwhelmed and then go outside and throw it away. Don't throw it away inside. Okay. And at that point, you'll be able to detect pyrazines in the next county because you've been basically overwhelmed with them. So you should try that. It is guaranteed to work. Okay. But again, let your housemates know you're going to do it. They may not like it.
That's
There you
great.
go.
That's awesome.
But before
Or you
we
can
move to
try it.
wine
You can try it in
two-
a hotel room in the minibar. There you
There
go.
Yeah, leave it in the hotel room for a week afterwards. Better still, leave it in an Airbnb and don't tell the people.
Ooh, no.
Oh, that would be so mean. Couple of thoughts before we move on to wine two. I think it's important that people do keep Rueda on their screen. Number one, it is an amazing wine appellation and style with the primary grape of Verdejo. This was the most important dry white wine in Spain before people discovered Albarino. The people were preceding it for a long period of time. And as Madeline pointed out correctly, Palomino was sort of the grape of choice, but it was also because they were making sherry style wines for the longest period of time, with just a handful of people, holding the torch for this style of wine. And then lastly, what's interesting, the whole Sauvignon Blanc thing, Tim's point of a couple of points of Sauvignon Blanc sticking out like a sore thumb. Emile Peynaud was consulted by the people at Morietta when they made this wine, and they said, can we do this? Can we do this? And he suggested, yeah, you could do it. They go, but what if it doesn't sell? And they said, oh, you should plant some Sauvignon Blanc as well, too, because it reminds me a bit of Semillon. And if you blend the two of them together, you'll make a delightful white wine, as said by a man from Bordeaux. So to the day, you can still blend legally a few percentage points, as Madeline alluded to, of Sauvignon Blanc into your Verdejo, but you need to be very judicious about it because, as Tim said, a little bit goes a long way. It's sort of like Cabernet with Sangiovese. You can dominate very easily. So with that said, I hope you like it. For those of you who that was your first Verdejo and first Rueda, I'm delighted you got to have a really good one to do it. As Tim said, they can be a bit more shrill. And this one has that wonderful balance of, to use Madeline's term, plumpness, but at the same time having a wonderful framework of acid. Onward to wine two. And I'm not going to do this like Drops of God. Has anybody been watching Drops of God recently? I've been doing that. And if I'm going to be like Issei, I'm just going to look at the wine, smell the wine, put it down, write on a piece of paper, and we're done for the day.
Oh
That's
my.
not what we do here. That's not what we do here. But if you look at these two wines side by side, and it's nice because we have two white wines, and you can look at them referentially. What you'll notice is that the second white wine, wine 2, is obviously a deeper, richer, more concentrated color than the first wine. And if Madeline's was sort of in that kind of yellowish vein, this one is sort of breaching more on that deeper version of yellow, perhaps even sort of a lighter gold color. As I swirl it around and look at it, it has a bit more weight to it and a bit more richness, a bit more volume, a bit more color, and everything is just going to suggest for lack of better words, a bigger wine to me, but I won't know that until I move further on it. And the legs move sort of moderately plus, which suggests to me ripeness again, perhaps alcohol a little bit, could be sweet, but probably not. Anyways, that's enough on that. Let's go ahead and give it a smell. Those of you who know me know I'm always looking for fruit, earth, and wood. Look for a few things. FEW in your wine. So right off the bat, what I'm struck with is this wine is not a fruit-driven wine purely. There is definitely a note, and I would say almost a driving note of minerality, come matchstick, come a little bit of sulfury, that sort of reductive style of winemaking. And that sort of sticks out to me actually at front. Once I peel that back, and I expect that over time as I continue to swirl that, it will dissipate away. Nevertheless, I am, like Madeline, a very citrus-driven wine. It's lemony, it's tart, it's at once both fruit, but also zest to the wine, and dare I add maybe just a little kiss of pith on it. It's got some underlying stone fruit character, but that's more on the just ripe side. It's got a little bit of tropicality to it, but once again, on the just ripe side, and if I were to say there were a leading genre of white fruit, it is going to be in that citrus vein, maybe even a little something quincy about it, if you wanted to do that, not as in John Adams, but rather as in the fruit. Then I am getting some herbal notes to it. Arguably a very soft note of sorrel in there, and maybe just a little bit of ginger or something like that. I guess ginger or ginger flower maybe would be what you were looking at here. But again, reminded of this sort of reduction here and a style that takes me to a particular part of the world that we won't know. But you could argue it's been chalky, reductive, minerally, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever it is, it suggests to me probably a deft use of batonnage or lees stirring during the production, which is usually where you sort of introduce those sorts of flavors, along with how much exposure to the fermenting wine you allow the oxygen to do that. Enough talk, let's taste. And a little floral too, I might add, not super floral. It really is about this sort of penetrating citrus fruit. Palate has got roundness to it. It's got texture again. I would say it's probably not quite as smooth as the Rueda we just had, because it has this very almost linear acidity that kind of drives the wine and drives the flavor. It's really expansive in the back palate. It is still a smooth wine, and I wouldn't at this stage of its evolution necessarily describe it as being, for lack of better words, super round or creamy, and definitely not buttery in nature. The weight on it is probably medium plus. That would suggest that the alcohol level is probably similar. Alcohol and weights of wines generally carry the same way. The acidity level it continues to carry through on the finish. I can still taste the wine. It's extremely long, and as I said before, quite expansive. And if you look at the wine's questions here, is the wine earthier or fruitier? I think I'd probably lean it more on the earthier side of things, and a little bit of floral, tartar type of character fruit. And the texture here is, again, as I said before, kind of medium but penetrating on the acid. I think it's a delightful wine, regardless of where it's from. So what are our choices here? We have Chardonnay. Chardonnay is the winemaker's wine. Obviously, you're starting with a good quality level of fruit, but it's interpreted very much by the person making the wine. Albarino. I talked about that before. That was the wine I referenced earlier in contexting it with Rueda. This is the Spanish white wine gift to the world, coming from up in Galicia. Tends to have stone fruit characters, usually bright acid, etc. Pinot Gris Grigio, again, something a little bit more neutral in profile, unless you're in Alsace, where it picks up a little bit more texture, but it can be generally relatively plain, as, by the way, can Chardonnay be until you start playing with it. And then, of course, we have other. As far as your choices go, Old World, we have France and Spain. Obviously, those could be extrapolated to Spain for both Albarino and Chardonnay. They do a little Pinot Blanc there, not so much. France could be certainly Chardonnay and Pinot Gris. Guess all of these could be other. Argentina does both Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, and a little bit of Albarino, though not so much in California. Of course, we do everything under God's sun. So it could fit any of those categories.
I see hesitation in a second wine. So again, reminder, anonymous. Go ahead and take a pick. As they teach you in grade school, it's 25% chance of winning the lottery here. So, put an answer in. Evan, while people are filling this out, we have a question here from Jerry. Welcome, Jerry. It's great to see you here. At first, he thought it was wet wool. But what could that be? Could it be that matchstick that he's getting?
Yeah, wet wool it comes from the is also often described as being sort of lanolin-y. And that sort of, to me, is more like the outside of a shoe. I guess is the best way of putting it. That sort of wet wool type thing. So if you're not getting anything sort of in that vein and genre, and I'm not really getting that here, you can find it. It's particularly acute in Sauvignon Blanc a lot, sometimes in Chenin Blanc. Not so much the varieties that we saw before, but what I'm getting here is much more, when I say matchstick, it's sort of like when you crack a matchstick, because most people use lighters these days, which are butane, right? But if you crack a matchstick, there is that sort of pungency of that kind of reductive sulfury type of aroma, obviously sulfur being part of the dip that they put on matches to make matchsticks.
Okay, 10 more seconds. So question here, is this, do you get a yeasty or doughy note on the finish at all, Evan?
Again, the thing that we're sort of talking around here and trying to describe in many ways probably does have a lot to do with batonnage and lees contact. By definition, lees are yeast. They're dead yeast, if you will, and the motivation of getting those yeasts into the wine through batonnage is going to at times give you sort of a sourdough or a yeasty sort of character. We very much associate it with young champagne and sparkling wines that have a basis of Chardonnay, but we can describe it with other wines as well too. And if you're picking that up strongly, it could obviously be for almost any white wine, and more white varieties are doing it these days, particularly neutral ones, to pick out quality and character out of the wine, but it's usually associated with just a couple of varieties.
Mm-hmm. Great. So here are the results. We have 61% on Chardonnay, 22% on Albarino. I've asked the question on what was other for those who did pick other, and we're 67% in Old World and 28% in New World. Any help there, Evan, on region a little bit?
Well, I was going to say, I'm not surprised that people came up with this way. The wine presents itself in a very old world fashion, particularly with respect to this thing we've been talking about before in the winemaking attributes to the wine, which are bringing out its old worldiness, if I can say that. The fruit profile, however, could either be from a very riper part of the year, but oftentimes you sacrifice the acids in that. If you look at, I don't know, 2019, 2013 for vintages in Europe, you would do that. So it doesn't surprise me that we ended up here. I think from a varietal standpoint, people are going to the right place. I think the old world, new world thing is an interesting quandary, which we will discuss momentarily.
Yep. All right. So there, as I pull up the video, Evan, there was a question here of maybe Chenin or Sauvignon Blanc.
Yes, Sauvignon Blanc probably, once again, not green enough to do so, and usually not a wine which has a lot of batonnage associated with it. As far as Chenin Blanc goes, that would be where, if you were getting a little bit of that wet wooliness before, that might be associated with it. There can be a bit of a lanolin thing with certain Chenin Blancs, but usually the nature of the fruit is going to drive there, and it's going to be more in that sort of bruised apple, slightly tropical. I always call it the flavor of like juicy fruit chewing gum, none of which I'm getting on this particular wine. So we're landing. Oh, that was a fast ride, but we're actually landing in, of all places, Argentina. So I think for a lot of you, you're probably going, oh, how could I have possibly gotten to Argentina? And the answer is, without familiarity, you probably wouldn't have. And once again, I want to reiterate to everybody that these classes that we teach, this webinar that we have, is not about training you to be a Jedi Knight in training, but rather for you to be able to discern quality, for you to be able to expand your palate, etc. And here the wine, I think, is unequivocally Chardonnay. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I put this wine in because in Argentina, in Mendoza, specifically in the Uco Valley, where this wine emanates from, which is down in sort of the south and east and adjacent to the Andes Mountains, particularly in the area where this is from, which is Parque Altamira, this is becoming known literally as the Burgundy, as the Côte de Beaune of South America, whether it's this wine that we're going to have that we'll talk about in a minute from Pepe Galante, or whether it's Lara Catena's White Stones and White Bones, or some of the things that Sebastian Zuccardi is doing. This area of the Uco Valley, this subzone, is where things are happening. Now, you can't talk about Puramun without talking about its founder, its owner, its soul, which is a gentleman by the name of Pepe Galante. And Pepe Galante is probably not a household name to you. Beautiful shot. Just love it there. But Pepe Galante is arguably the patriarch, the grandfather of quality vinification in Argentina. He was the winemaker at Catena from 1976 until 2010. I want you to think about that. That's a 34-year run as being the lead winemaker before Alejandro Vigil got there, etc. So he helped, as Nicolas Catena was rethinking wines, to help shape and drive the wines, and is considered by everybody to be freaking legendary there. He started this project, which is the only thing that has got his name on it exclusively, in 2010, Puramun, and he has been the consulting winemaker for a number of other wineries forever, most notably Salentine Winery. You probably heard about them in Mendoza. He is there to the day consulting winemaker. I find the man to be just a living legend, and will go down as being one of the great living legends. So I said before, Parque Altamira has got strong amounts of calcium carbonate in the soil, a very strong limestone thing, which I think probably pushes this sort of semi-reductive character there as well too. But if you were thinking this wine was Burgundy, you're not wrong. And it really is. It is Burgundy in Argentina. And that's where I think wines coming from this particular parcel of land in Uco Valley are being done. So if you see Uco Valley Chardonnay on there, this is the profile. Maybe not as well made as what Pepe is doing all the time, but it's wonderful. And I think what's extraordinary about this wine is, you know what good quality white Burgundy prices are these days. This wine is at a fraction of that price. Having said that, they are in between distribution right now, so I don't know how easy it is to find, but it is a go-to wine in my household. I keep this on hand and enjoy it when I want to show somebody something Burgundian, but I don't want to pull my last bottle of Pouligny Montrachet out. This wine will do the trick.
Madeline has a quick question for Tim, actually. Tim, can you speak to the reduction and also about the moderate presence of oak?
You'll describe reduction better than I
Right,
will,
yeah.
so that's fine.
So first of all, I'm not a chemist. I've never even impersonated one. And second of all, that's a short question with a long answer. So to be Inigo Montoya and sum up, you know, living things are either giving up oxygen molecules or they're taking them on. If they're giving them up, they're called reduced. If they're taking them on, they're called oxidized, right? So it makes sense. And with wine is no exception. And especially during fermentation, we have yeast creating all sorts of chemical reactions. You actually need oxidation or oxygen, at least a certain amount. And if you don't have enough oxygen to feed the yeast as they're doing their job during fermentation, you can end up with off aromas or sulfury aromas, which is what people usually call reduction or reduced. And that can also happen when the wine is bottled, depending on the closure and how much oxygen is introduced at the time. And otherwise, what we call reduction usually smells like sulfur type aromas or just off type aromas. And the two causes are generally, issues during fermentation being a lack of oxygen or a lack of oxygen during bottling. So, and
I wanted to bring it up because a lot of people use it and may not, they may misrecognize it. I like, in simplifying, if you don't mind, not that was complex, but I often smell a little skunky smell too. That tells me it's And it's
Sure.
not necessarily a flaw, everyone, but it is a
No.
reflection of sometimes even a paranoia about exposing the wine to oxygen
Yeah.
during winemaking.
Yeah, and
with-
you know, certain grape varieties are prone to reduction. I
Right.
mean, Chenin Blanc, we keep talking about, the wet wool thing is one of them.
Mhm.
Another one is Mourvedre and
Mhm.
Monastrell is
Yeah.
notoriously reductive, and it needs a lot of oxygen during fermentation. And if it's not there, it's pretty stinky when you open it, but that can be resolved either way by decanting the wine and letting it sit.
Yeah, and as a general rule, reduction and reductiveness can be mitigated by just aerating the wine, either in a
Yeah.
decanter, in the glass, or whatever.
Mhm.
And again, there's a difference between, and perhaps this was my bad choice of words, the difference between reductive style winemaking and actual
Yeah.
reduction. Reductive style winemaking sort of implies minimizing the contact with oxygen during the processing, which generally then will bring out, as Tim said before, a slightly sulfury character, as Madeline said before, diminished other things there. But again, it's part of the personality and it's part of that style. People oftentimes use interchangeably match sticky and reductive style interchangeably. And the
Not a
last thing I
bad
just
thing,
wanted to,
right.
what?
Not a bad thing necessarily.
Not at
right.
all, not at all. The
Mhm.
one thing I did want to address, and I want to move it on to Tim, is somebody asked a question I forgot to mention, Uco Valley, high altitude vineyard. So this vineyard, I don't have the exact altitude of it, but generally you're going to find anything from like 2,900 to about 5,000 feet in altitude in this part of the world. So that adds a whole other nuance of how the wines are made, etc. Cooler nights, longer elongated growing season, and then obviously doing your appropriate protection against the UV to ensure that the fruit doesn't get cooked. So it's a nice tightrope act.
An interesting Chardonnay for those who say anything but Chardonnay. I feel
Mhm.
like, you know,
Exactly right.
for New World Chardonnay drinkers, this is really different.
And look at
People-
Pepe, he's positively, regal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, just one more
Absolutely.
thing about this wine, and I really love this wine, Evan. It's a great choice. You know, this is wine, this is conscious winemaking choices in terms of reductive style and use of sulfur and everything else. And there are winemakers making white wine, especially all over the planet, who make wine this way because they're making wines for the long haul. This is a wine to me that is easily 12 to 15 years in the cellar and maybe longer. So, that's why the wine is why it is. Okay, let's move on to red wines. And let's take a look at our questions. First question, what is the depth of color or lack thereof? Tell you about the possible grape variety from which the wine was made. Question 2, what non-fruit aromas and flavors do you detect? And to me, non-fruit, that's really the important part of the game. And then finally, do you believe this is a cooler climate wine or a warmer climate wine? And what's going to speak to that is the ripeness level of the fruit and the alcohol and the acidity level. Okay, with that, let's take a look. In terms of what the wine looks like and the depth of color, I can read through mine. I'm looking at my notes through it. I'm going to call this true ruby red color. It lightens up to a delightful pink, almost fuchsia at the edge. The wine's fairly youthful. There's not a lot of development in the color at the edge. And then what else? The legs, tears, Marangoni effect, whatever you want to call it, is high. Interesting. Okay, because what to me that sets off a curious question about lack of depth of color and possible alcohol level, or maybe residual sugar. Who knows? On the nose. Okay, so in terms of fruit, and I think I've said this before, with red wines, they go categories of fruit. Those being red, black, blue, and other dried. Okay, this is predominantly red fruit, and it's very ripe red fruit. To me, red plum, red raspberry, cranberry, almost craisin, and red cherry, but bean cherry, not sour cherry. And the condition here is ripe and fresh. There's black fruit also. And to me, the black fruits here are lifted. They have acid. So that would be blackberry and black raspberry. And once again, those are fresh and ripe. The non-fruit that I alluded to in question 2, starting above the glass, there's some really pretty rose floral qualities to it. Also a touch of lavender. And then there are herbal, very subtle herbal qualities, almost like black tea. There's also citrus peel, orange peel, and even orange rind. And what else? In terms of other herbal type qualities, there is laurel bush. There is little bit of jasmine too. I might add it for floral. There's bay leaf, there's tea again, and then there's brown mushroom. In terms of earth, to me, the fruit dominates the wine. There is some turn soil, no mineral whatsoever. And then I would go right into the oak. They'd say there's mixed oak here, some new, some used. And I know that because there's vanilla and slight spice. There's also a certain nutty quality, oxidative quality that you get from oak aging. Things like walnut and pistachio, and maybe a little sandalwood too. That's really pretty. In terms of, I'm going to go ahead and taste it, so please do. And then on the palate, everything maps across from the nose. Fruit still stays ripe, but the finish gets a little tartar. So those bean cherries turn to sour cherries. The craisins turn into fresh cranberries. So it's tart. It's really got good balancing acidity. This is good winemaking. What else about it? There's some stem tannins. So there's a green stemmy quality in the mid palate, which means we probably got some whole cluster fermentation. And if you're fermenting whole clusters, you've got stems, right? And so there's some stemmy quality to it. But I like the fact that it's really balanced. So it's probably only partial, not complete. Again, the earthiness is very subtle, and the fruit tends to be center stage. The rest of the structure of the wine, the alcohol is high. I can feel it here. Warmth, heat. The tannins are moderate. And again, I got to point to the winemaking, which is really outstanding here. The tannins are subtle, they're velvety, they're supple. The wine's, very complex, but everything's very harmonious, and the texture is seamless from beginning to end. The finish is long and the complexity is fairly high. Okay, so everybody, here are your choices for stardom. First, we've got Grenache blend, we've got Pinot Noir, and we've got Mencia or Mencia blend, okay? And your region, country type choices are Spain, which would be the Mencia, and possibly the Grenache if it's Garnacha. We've got France, which could work for Pinot Noir Grenache. And we've got California, New Zealand, which could work for Pinot Noir, and California probably for Grenache. Okay, so lots of choices there. Once again, and I wrote this in the comments in the previous wine, process of elimination. You might look at those 3 grapes and go, okay, what is this not? Before trying to decide what it is. What's missing?
Tim,
it is missing.
Oh, well, sorry. While we're waiting for folks to pull in, Kevin had a great question about what he is actually supposed to be looking for in the legs. Is it the width of the lines? Is it the space in between? Is it the speed of the fall? How quickly do they appear? Can be a little confusing. How would you define this sight thing that is such a big clue?
Okay, so Kevin, great question. And first of all, I'm going to frame the answer by saying the legs, tiers, and the wine are marginally important and only give you a little piece of information about what you're going to confirm on the nose and the palate. And that's the structure. Second of all, what you're actually looking for. And also one thing, if your glass is not clean and polished, all bets are off, okay? Because otherwise it's not going to work. When you swirl the glass, or if you want to rotate it, I'm looking at 2 things. How quickly or slowly do the legs fall? And the slower they are, more possibility for higher alcohol, or in certain cases, residual sugar. And then how thick or thin are they? And if they're thick, slower moving tiers, odds are it's a high alcohol wine, or it's a wine with residual sugar. If the wine has thinner, really quickly moving tiers, not so much alcohol. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep. And Tim, between Mencia and Pinot and Grenache, what would you say the coloration in terms of light to dark?
Well, if I say that, it just may give the answer away. But Jerry, okay, but so we're gonna, when we open the envelope, we're gonna talk about that, because great. Your color alone you would probably rule out one of the grapes immediately.
That is why Jerry is asking. Very tricky.
I know, Jerry. I'll tell you in just a second.
Yeah, and I do see, Tim, that there is a bit of diversity here in regions. All 4 regions kind of have, down the middle, almost 20-25%. So there are takers for every single region. So I think
yeah. But This is definitely heavy on the deductive thinking part, but there's a
Yeah.
method to the madness. And once you click to it, it's very straightforward. All right, so we've got 28% of people growing Grenache blend, and obviously I'm thinking France. Pinot Noir, 50%, good, and everybody's probably really split there. We'll talk about it in a second. And then Menthea, we've got 22%. Okay, so first of all, Menthea, by and large, and Evan and Maddie would know this as much or better than me, is a fairly deeply colored grape. It would have a lot of depth of color here. In fact, I've had some examples that were almost black purple in color. Okay, so that alone, I'm going to ruling out Menthea. Grenache blend, I'm saying, where's the stuff for Grenache? Where's the stuff? And the stuff here is pepper and all sorts of savory and gamey type elements. And there ain't none of that, right? And what does that leave? By process of elimination, Pinot Noir. Okay, the confundity, and I think I just made that up. The confounding part is that this wine is high alcohol. And you're thinking, Pinot Noir, the delicate flower, what's the deal? Well, the deal here is that climate change, but also certain regions are in warmer places where you grow Pinot Noir. And as a matter of fact, this is one of them, okay? As far as the wine being from France or Spain or from Europe, there's almost no earthiness whatsoever. Yeah, there's just not, okay? All right, that would keep us in the new world. And so let's get on that private jet. And let's see where we're going. And we're actually going to a beautiful place. And not that far from you, Evan. Yeah, it's probably what, about 2.5 hours? 3 hours?
Hours, yeah, 2.5. Yeah. Goodbye, Argentina.
Yeah,
So we went from the old world to the new world. And as we turn here, the question is, are we going back to the old world and new world? Based on your last comment, Tim, I think
we're going due north.
I don't know about all y'all,
Right,
you can
no
stay
doubt.
on your private plane. I am in an aisle seat in business class. That's all I have to say for anything over
Drinking
5
your
or
fair
6
share of
hours.
champagne, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'll see business class any day. Thank you.
On somebody
And
else's
here we are.
tab
We're
if
going back to
possible.
California.
Yay, California.
And we're going to the Salinas area and the Santa Lucia Highlands. And as we go in, this is really kind of a unique place for Pinot Noir, but also just for viticulture. So you've got the hills, and the name just flew out the window. Anyway, this is Rora Wines, which is Gary Francione. And Santa Lucia Highlands, has been known for Pinot Noir now for probably 25 years. And the two Garys, Gary Francione being one of them and Gary Pizzoni being the other, and they are best friends and have been since high school. Those two guys put this place on the map for Pinot Noir because they were planting vineyards going back to the mid-90s. And as far as Gary Francione and his wife, Rosella, they planted their first two vineyards in 96 and 97, have planted several more since. The winery is dedicated to Pinot Noir. And along with Gary Pizzoni, they really created a paradigm for Pinot Noir and a distinct style because as you can taste, this is really unique for California Pinot Noir. It is a riper style, but the climate of the place, because A, it's windy, and B, it's so close to Monterey Bay, you've got a pretty major diurnal shift. But in the afternoon, when the sun is on the grapes, it's incredibly windy from the ocean. And that really slows down ripening. It also means that the grapes, the berries, to protect themselves, grow thicker skins. Hence, you've got more color, you've got more intensity, you've got more richness, more everything than you do in your garden variety California Pinot Noir. To me, these wines are utterly delicious. The ripeness level does tempt you to say, wow, that's almost Grenache, but the flavors are purely Pinot Noir. And big fan of these wines and have been for a long time.
Yeah, and I just want to point out to folks, especially those who are on their first webinar with us, on our bottles, on the back of them, we have all of the alcohol percentage. So as Tim is talking about the alcohol percentage, you can actually double check that. And this Roar is 14.8% alcohol.
Yeah.
The beauty of those peel-aways, the peel to reveal stickers, are also that you can either do the tasting blind. We also hide the alcohol, but you can then pull it back, see what it is, and then you can, put it back on if you want to blind taste your best friend a little bit later on and get some repurposing out of it.
Or
too.
retaste yourself.
Or retaste
It might be
yourself.
fun to see that.
You can stick it above also the informazione in case you want to get back, because I like simple, you know.
And I have to
but,
give props to Madeline. This idea really came from you. So thank you for that. I also want to give props, Tim, just for a quick moment, to the brothers who work at the winery. They both got annual subscriptions to Master the World after Evan put our first. So
No, it was
really
after I had
amazing.
lunch with them. Then they put their wine.
What winery?
Right, no,
What
but we got
winery?
their wine in there. They became, so it's really interesting that at Master the World we have a bunch of winemakers, especially here in the US, because we ship primarily here to the US as our fans and subscribers. So it's really awesome.
Just a quick shot, and I don't want to steal Tim's time, but this is a beautiful shot looking towards the mountains of the Santa Lucia Highlands. If you're driving north to south, San Francisco down towards Santa Barbara, literally very much like when you're driving through Burgundy, all of the vineyards, all of the name household vineyards, the cruise, if you will, are all on the right-hand side of the road, just set with that that exposure. It literally is a Burgundian look there, and there's the family.
They're the guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. It's amazing. I like this next comment. I wish we got those discounts on Roar, but no. But Evan does a really great job of making. Yeah, Evan does a really great job making sure that in every kit we've got high-low pricing to be able to afford some of this higher pricing. So love it.
Yep. All right, let's move on to wine number 4. And here are questions to start with. What does the depth of color in the wine suggest? The same thing as the previous. And look at the color of the wine. Yeah, now for something completely different. And then the question to you, was oak used in the production of the wine? And we will discover that. And finally, how would you describe the quality of the tannins? And then I'm going to lead with another question about the tannins. As you taste the wine, where do you feel them the most in your mouth? The front, the middle, or the back? Because that, to me, if I tasted this wine blind, would be a big clue about where it's from. Okay, let's go through it. Starting with the sight. 1, you can't see the glass. I would call this a ruby purple. So red and purple together, and the rim is thinner, but it's like an electric fuchsia. Very 60s, okay? But notice it's very thin, so the intensity of the wine, the density must be considerable. It also stains the glass color, yep. And then in terms of the leg steers, I think this is for you, Kevin. They're fairly thick and they're stained, and they're moving in slow motion. Half my glass is on vacation, which means the wine has elevated alcohol, okay? Over 14% if you want a number. All right, and then on the nose, what do we have? All right, so we're going to stick with my technique of calling categories of fruit first. This is a combination of red and black again. It's kind of even. And the quality for both is fresh and ripe, but with some of the black fruit in particular, it's dried. Okay. The red fruit I'm going to call red plum, really ripe red plum, ripe red cherry, and maybe a little cranberry. And that's where the craisin, the dried cranberry, comes in. Black fruit is very ripe, riper than the Pinot Noir. So it's ripe black plum, black cherry, and then a little bit of lifted blackberry with the acidity. Okay. Floral, there's a little bit of what I might be tempted to call violet or rose above the glass. What else? There's a green quality. It's like leafy salad greens. Yeah. Maybe even a little of arugula. There is some anise, star anise. There is some mushrooms. And I'll say that for a second because this wine definitely has earthiness. In fact, everybody stop for a second and go back and smell the Pinot Noir. Okay. And then come back to wine number 4 and go, aha, this wine is profoundly earthy. Yes, it is. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a second. There's a little bit of tea leaf, almost Earl Grey bergamot going on here, and tobacco leaf, green tobacco leaf. And then the wine, as I mentioned, is earthy. So we've got mushroom, we've got turned soil. What else? It's like forest floor, and there is a little minerality to it too, that you'll get more on the palate. What else? Is there oak? I'm going to taste it. Let's find out. So I didn't pick up any oak notes on the nose and on the palate. There's none. All right. There's no texture in the back. There's no smoke, there's no toast, there's no spices, there's no vanilla, coffee, blah, 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 blah. There's none of that. So I want to point out, this is very curious because you have a wine with this depth of color and no oak. And to me, that is unusual. Okay. We're going to get to more in a second. As for the structure of the wine, take another sip. This one for science.
Yes, for science.
Okay. First of all, the acidity is close to high. In fact, I'm squinting after the second sip. Yeah. Okay. So the acidity is elevated. It's way beyond the Pinot Noir. All right. The alcohol, say, and inhale after you spit it out, is high. Once again, I feel it down in here, the heat. Okay. And then finally getting to the tannin. And again, I'm going to, for the fun, just take another sip of the wine, hold it in your mouth for say 3 to 5 seconds, spit it out, and then ask yourself, where do I feel the tannins most? And then how much tannin is there? All right, so the tannin level is medium plus easily, and maybe a little beyond. But for me, most of the tannin is in the front of the mouth. Okay, that's important to me in terms of identifying where the wine's from. And I'll explain why. All right, so let's get to the ballot, Lee Mang. Here we go. Your choices are Pinot Noir, Gamay, Barbera, and the notorious other. Okay, your regions, France, okay, which would make sense for Pinot Noir, or Barbera, Italy for Barbera, California for Pinot Noir, and Australia for Pinot Noir also, okay? All right, with that, cast your votes. Vote only once, but make sure you do. If you have something that you're convinced it has to be that's not listed, by all means, list it. Absolutely vote for it, okay?
Yeah. I have to say, Tim, I wish you were in my brain whenever I taste.
Oh, no, you don't.
But there's a second best option to that, which is your book, which we'll talk more about it, because it's really helpful having read your book, this process. I feel very empowered, I have to say.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Okay. All right. So has everybody voted?
I think that people are almost there. So I'm going to give it 10 seconds.
And once again, everybody, process of elimination here. Okay. Process of elimination, because if you do the work, you're going to go, okay. Okay.
But it's not Pinot Noir because we just did a Pinot Noir. Just saying.
I mean,
just saying. That's what Evan told
we
last
cannot
time.
be trusted. Okay. And we proved that.
We did 2 Pinot Noirs last time together, side by side.
All right.
So here we go. So a lot of people went to Barbera, a few people went to Gamay, and then nobody went to Pinot Noir because they're thinking this is kind of Pinot Noir on steroids, and it's the wrong color. Gamay, what's missing? If this is a classic example of Gamay, meaning it was from Beaujolais in France, 2 things are missing. One is carbonic maceration, and 2 is stem inclusion, right? They're both missing. And again, this would be like, I don't know, the X-Men of Gamay. It would be like, wow. So Barbera is a good call, and we need to talk about that. That would be from Italy. So let's get on Evan's private jet and let's see where we're going, because man, if we're going to Italy, I'm going to be a really happy guy, especially to Barbera land, which is like, yeah, it's beautiful. And
Tim, what flavor or aroma is missing to consider stem inclusion?
Stem inclusion that I mentioned on the Pinot Noir, Jerry, is the green stemmy twiggy quality. It's literally like, when you were a kid and you used to chew on twigs, at least I did. It's exactly the same, because it's exactly the same. Okay, so here we are. We're taking off from the beautiful Santa Lucia Highlands.
Always eat salad in Santa Lucia Highlands. Remember that lettuce pays for that part of the world.
That's right.
Tim,
and we are going to Piedmont. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're going for that. Can you expand on your comments
we're going to do that
about
in just a second.
Yeah,
we'll do that in just a second. Let's talk about this place first. We're going to Piedmont, and to a beautiful place, a place with amazing food, with some of my favorite red wines on the planet. And we're going to Cantina Monteribaldi, which is a small producer. It's been around. The original iteration was founded in 1968. The guy's name was Pino Italiano. And then in 1994, his son took over, but not before, Pinot acquired parcels of several different crus in Barbaresco and one in Barolo. So the winery now, in its current iteration, makes probably a dozen wines, and half a dozen are major league wines from Nebbiolo. Now, as everybody knows, Barbera, well, you may not know, sorry. Barbera is the most widely planted grape in Piedmont, right? It is kind of the cash crop, and it has been forever and a day. It gives you good yields. It's easy to make. But, now in 2023, there's a dichotomy of 3 different styles. And this is one of those styles. This is done in stainless steel and goes through, its primary, secondary fermentation, malolactic and stainless steel. It's left on the lees for like 2 or 3 months to settle out, to clarify naturally, and bottled with minimal filtration. And it's a wine that's to be, enjoyed over the next, say, 2 to 3 to 4 years, right? Other styles of Barbera, the traditional style, kind of mirrors where Barbaresco and Barolo were 30 years ago. And that's huge old wood, very oxidative style, left in wood for a long time, like 4 to 6 to 8 months, and kind of rustic, prone to volatile acidity, sometimes for Brettanomyces, old school. Chiaretto, the Barbera called Pavia was one I remember going back 40 years, right? And then you have the designer. You have a guy, the late Giacomo Bologna, who in the 90s started making old vine Barbera and barrique aging it and charging $100 retail a bottle. So you've got those 3 dichotomies. For me, this is my favorite style of Barbera because it's affordable, meaning high teens, low 20s, right? And it's delicious wine. And then in terms of food and wine pairing, and Evan, I'm sure you would agree, the acidity on this wine makes it incredibly versatile. But the tannin, okay, so who was that? Dipankar, you asked. The tannin, Italian wines, grape tannin, front of the mouth. And this wine has more than a little bit. For a straight ahead Barbera, it's got a lot of grip in the front of the palate. And that to me identifies it as Italian. If you taste Barolo or Barbaresco that's done in oak, and most of them are, especially the ones in barrique, you get a double whammy of oak tannin and then grape tannin, right? And then we talked about the stem tannin, and for me, that's mid palate. Okay, does that make sense? Okay.
So Tim, would you clarify that for a moment? So you perceive fruit tannin in the front and oak tannin in the back and stem tannin mid palate. Is that correct?
Okay, and I have to presage that by saying that's for me, because I think everybody's a little different. But for me, oak tannin is distinctly in the back of the palate, and it's accompanied by oak flavors too, right? All the spices, etc. The green stem tannin uses mid palate, but the oak tannin, the grape tannin, especially in Italian red wines, is front of the mouth.
And also the oak tannin I find generally to be more astringent, actually more drying, whereas that you get that the pop from the grape tannin, but it doesn't have that same drying effect that you would get from wines that have spent a lot of time in oak. And actually, by the way, old oak as well as new oak both give you that sort of mouth drying, suck on a cotton swab effect.
Yeah,
I think it's so useful that we're clarifying this because the company line on Barbera, right, is high acid, low tannin. This has a significant amount of tannin, but they're fruit tannins and they're finely grained. It's also a very rich Barbera, which is lovely.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It is.
and I think to your point, Madeline, oftentimes people use tannin specifically to talk about bitterness, astringency, and drying, and they sort of forget that, to Tim's point, I love the family there. Tannins can range in different styles, and different tannins do different things in your mouth too. But I think people generalize, put things in little boxes, put bows around them. And when most people talk tannin, they talk about hardness, astringency, and ergo ability to age, when it don't have to all be that way.
Yep.
Look at that family.
Photos of the Italiano family. There's Pino and Carla, and Luciano, who is the chief winemaker, along with his brother Roberto.
Oh, this is a good question. Jerry's asking, would you call this tannin soft?
Well, no, Jerry. I said the tannin's medium plus at best. If you think soft tannin red wine, go back and taste the Pinot Noir, everybody, because the Pinot Noir by comparison is just like a down comforter. That is delicious wine, by the way.
Great
Oh,
example of
yes.
Barbera.
That's
All right, in deference to not giving Madeline just a couple of minutes at the end, let's talk about wine number 5. Terrific tutorial, Tim, on the grape use of Barbera. By the way, don't forget California Barberas are starting to do better things than they ever have been, not just being used for color in Blanc wine. So some things to think about here. Again, I think Tim covered a lot of this here. Think about the oak for a minute versus the earthiness and the floral components that are there. But let's go ahead and take a look at this wine. The wine here doesn't have quite as much vibrance and, dare I say, fluorescence as Tim's wine had before. I would say it's probably medium plus in extraction. The color, I would say, is more of a faded ruby with an even more faded ruby at the edge, suggesting to me perhaps a little bit of bottle age on the wine, but enough extract of color that it suggests to me that it's going to be a warmer climate varietal. It doesn't have the translucency that, say, Pinot Noir would have, or other grape varieties that have that you could read through them. I can read through this if I squint, but it is reasonably dark in concentration. Into the nose. It's an interesting combination. I am getting definitely fruit, earth, and wood characters here. The fruit characters that I'm getting tend to be on the more savory side, not necessarily on the ripe side of things. So they tend to be not quite as jammy, although there is certainly a strong ripe, dare I say, even, excuse me, pushing on a jammier character fruit, but I wouldn't call the wine itself jammy because the fruit expression is just not that sweet, if you will. But I'm getting plum, I'm getting mulberry, I'm getting dark fruit berries, things like that. Not so much red fruited, more black fruited, arguably a little bit more blue fruited here. Definitely suggests some sun and ripeness, which again, based on a bit of color and all that is there. I am getting floral. I am getting some lavender. I'm definitely getting some violet notes here. And I would say they are both at once fresh, but also starting to be dried, kind of like those little sachets you throw in your sock drawer. There are some leafy greens and other green elements to it, like chard, like even a little bit of escarole or something like that. There's a bit of tea leaf here, definitely a licorice component to it, mushroominess, almost a soft truffly character there. And then even an interesting sort of exotics here. There's a little bit of, dare I say, cardamom, almost juniper, and then some other stuff going on. Now, what is that other stuff? I'm getting a smokiness. I'm getting a meatiness. I'm getting a oakiness and sort of a cooked fruit character there. Strong leafy elements here. Somebody mentioned tobacco in the notes. I think that's a very good call, but it's not per se a fruit-driven wine, yet it's not really an earthy-driven wine here, although there is sort of like a dusty character of dried earth there. Not so much minerally. Lots of interesting things going on here. Definitely a complex wine. In the mouth, wine has a nice forward attack on it. Once again, the fruit is present in the wine, but not necessarily per se as fruit driven. Again, sort of savory. There's almost sort of like a meatiness, sort of like kind of a beef jerky, saucisson type character of the wine. That's then been like you took like a jam or a chutney or something, and you spread it on top of a piece of sausage as opposed to a crouton and just ate it there. Sort of an interesting combination of fruit and meat at the same time. It's relatively medium full in body, which suggests some alcohol to it. There's tannins there, but the tannins here are pleasant. I would say they're not quite as hard and sharp as they are in the Barbera we just came off with, although certainly more present in the wine than the Pinot Noir that we had. And they are a little bit drying, which does suggest oak to me, although the oak suggests to me to be a combination of older and larger size, along perhaps with a couple of interspersed new barrels. The wine was long. It's got a fairly rich finish, but once again, savory. That's what's driving me here. All right, so where could we go with this wine? Grape-wise, Grenache and Grenache blend, and think about some of the things that Tim talked about before for Grenache markers. Touriga Nacional or Touriga Nacional blend, thinking there about the Douro Valley, particularly, or the Dow, generally strong color, strong flavor, strong like bull. Pinotage, which is an interesting blend of Pinot Noir and Sanso, which makes very interesting, unique styles of wine coming primarily out of South Africa, although it's grown in other places. And then, of course, our friend Other. Portugal, of course, speaks specifically to the Touriga Nacional blend. I am not aware of any Pinotage or Grenache there. France could certainly hit you the Grenache, and increasingly you will see Touriga. Touriga was approved to be put in Bordeaux blends as of a couple of years ago, so don't overlook that. Still probably too early, but in a few years you're going to see soupçon, dare I say, of Touriga going into those Bordeaux blends. Pinotage could be South Africa, it could be any of those other things. Washington actually does all three of those varieties. Yes, there are diminutive amounts of Pinotage made there and a little bit of Touriga, although clearly the Grenache blend, particularly in the Walla Walla area, would be a good call.
Evan, would you liken iron to meat?
Iron can be a slightly meaty thing. Usually iron is going to be more that sort of ferrous character is often associated with a meatiness there, but meatiness generally tends to deal with more with production styles and certain decisions you make, and literally tastes like Madeline likes to call it, I think, the Jimmy Dean factor, but there is sort of this sort of chorizo, salumi, charcuterie character, which is different than an ironiness, which is generally going to be both felt, but come off to you more like, God, I mean, I guess calf's liver has a lot of iron in it, so maybe it could be that, but it's usually more of more mineral, more strong mineral, metallic mineral thing.
And do you get any tomato leaf in this?
Yeah, you could argue that there's a little bit there. That might sort of be, again, one person's tomato leaf is another person's escarole, is another person's chard. Do not get hung up, everybody, on the vernacular here. We're all essentially talking about the same things. But yeah, tomato leaf could give you a similar type genre. But again, we're all in that savory vein. So
I'm gonna
Yeah.
close the poll, but I have to say that I think that this might require a bit of explanation because we're only at 59%. I can only attribute that to people being a little confused or confounded by the wine. I'll share the results for those who did
or unfamiliar. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So 23% on Grenache, 31% on Touriga, and 46% on Pinotage. So, a good mix.
Yeah, quick little primer here. Touriga wines generally tend to be much deeper, much darker, much more voluminous. If you will, think more like Portuguese Cabernet Sauvignon. And this wine in its own right is a little bit too gentle, a style there. And they are generally going to be all about the florals and all about a very deep expression of dark blue and black fruit. Once again, we're not there, unless you were showing a wine that was like 20 or 30 years old. Grenache tends to be one, soft, round, creamy. It can possess some of these meaty notes, but generally it drops color a lot faster than what this wine is showing. And it's usually not going to see as much oak on it blended well, because it really is all about the fruit character, as well as, again, perhaps blended with a little bit of Syrah to pick that up there. Pinotage, think about what the parent is of Pinotage. You've got Pinot Noir, which gives you sort of an elegance and a lightness to it. And then you have Sanso, which is very rony, peppery, meaty, and as Tim mentioned before, can be a little bit reductive along with its compatriot Mourvedre. So we're leaving Italy here. Ciao to our friends in Piemonte. I had my last plate of truffles and risotto. Get on my plane, hang out with Madeline in business class, sipping champagne, knowing that I'm going to probably be on a one-stopper somewhere because I'm not aware of too many flights that will take me from Milan directly on as long a flight as this is going to be and head me way
Did you see Jerry's Carmenere?
I was just gonna say
another that's been
I was getting that. Let me do my job.
We'll get there. We're ending up in South Africa, and we're specifically in an area called Franschhoek. And Franschhoek is in the Paarl region in the Western Cape and is a absolute bastion of great old vine Pinotage. So this is in fact a Pinotage, as I said before, a cross of Pinot Noir and Sanso, known for its sort of herbal, leafy, savory, meaty, smoky character. So this is a really solid example of Pinotage. If you haven't had one before, hit save, file this upstairs and make recommendations to it earlier. This is a particular property called Bellingham. And the Bellingham property was established actually in 1893. So it's a pretty new one. No, I'm sorry, I misread my writing. 1693, established there. That was when the first 1,000 vines of Pinotage were planted there, and it stayed in family hands until 1943 when it was sold to its current owners. It was originally called Bellinchamp, which is Dutch for pretty field, and it was certainly changed over to Bellingham after that. Don't ask me why exactly, but I think they do a lovely job. It is older vines. Pinotage does lend itself to an old vine thing, very much along the way of like Zinfandel or Syrah and other vines do. And I do think it's just a nice example of what's going on here. So,
Evan, there was a
voila.
question that I didn't want to interrupt you to get to, but
Yeah.
let me just do it right here. Carmenere. What was
Carmenere,
it?
green, mean, much more pyrrhizinic than this. Even in its ripest forms, it's going to tend to be at its best red and yellow bell peppers, at its worst the green pepper in the refrigerator that Tim talked about before, layered with cocoa powder. So this doesn't really have that character. This has more of that sort of the prettiness of the fruit from the Pinot Noir and the rusticity of the Cinsault. When Pinotage is at its best, it brings out the best in both of them and does not taste like bad Pinotage, which is somewhere between rubber tires and roadkill. So bad Pinotage, not fun.
And we have someone actually thanking us for showing a Pinotage.
There you go.
Because, also I have to say, as someone who was, my subconscious was trained to fear Pinotage because bad examples were coming into the States right when apartheid fell, right? And we were regrettably getting a lot of inexpensive stuff from South Africa that misrepresented the nobility of this growing region. But there's none of that to define it very scientifically, funk that bad Pinotage can have. But I'm not going to channel roadkill. That's just too depressing for a vegan vegetarian. So,
But I would, dare I say, also ask that everybody familiarize themselves. If you're into Pinotage, you just want to get a sense of expanding your palate before I hand it over to Madeline. In South Africa, they have the best 10 Pinotages every year in a judging that's there. And I will suggest to you that any one of those wines that you can find off that list is a really, really good example. We've shown Cannenkopf and others before, but this is another. Bellingham does a great job. So enough said on Pinotage. Madeline, I want to save the rest of the time for you.
when I land in South Africa after my business class flight, I want to go to that house and live there. It looks so nice in Franschhoek. Yes, okay, and now I am priming myself for my little, I'm not even going to call it a race through wine number 6. I'm just going to keep it simple, but we will do it justice. And cheers to my colleagues. You guys are taking notes, I take notes. We learn from one another because you can always learn, it's endless. And also we approach wines differently. So it's neat to hear, someone else's perspective. So thank you, Tim and Evan, as encouraged by Line. The color on this, if you don't even have to swirl it, just turn the glass. And it is, drum roll, staining the glass. So this is, not made, process of elimination, from a thin skin, translucent grape variety. I can't see my finger or nothing through it when I look through it. So it is opaque. And I love Tim's comment about, going on vacation. The legs are sort of taking a little nap, starting again, taking a little nap, they're fully colored. So this is telegraphing to us. And if you are training yourself to draw conclusions, we're not going to decide now or even start what it is, but at least we can note the appearance, which will either be confirmed or negated by what we perceive on the palate. I always say this, Tim, but my favorite quote of yours is, there's a part of you who is desperate to know what the wine is, right? So the inclination is to try to draw a conclusion from the color. Let's hold that boat. So the center, if I were to define it, is the darkest possible ruby. You could call it purple if you want to, or red with black tones in it. And it is monochromatic until the very rim. If you're looking at it against a white surface, and the rim, actually the hue doesn't change. much. It's really a true ruby red at the rim, but it hasn't started picking up any yellow or orange tones to it, which is an indication that it is a young baby made from smaller, thick skin, possibly blue-black grape variety or varieties. Because remember, we do have an option of blends. And what am I asking here? Red fruit, black fruit, or possibly blue fruit dominate. So I didn't put that up there. There's a difference between perfectly ripe, just ripe, and overripe is going to be moving into, cooked or jammy land. And perfectly ripe is when it's like the best strawberry you've ever had, that smell. Relative age and secondary characteristics. When a wine looks like this, it can have complexity, just a note to self. It can be young, but it may not have picked up what we call vinous, V-I-N-O-U-S, or qualities, which reveal themselves with bottle age. And are the tannins harsh or pleasantly drying? And both Tim and Evan have reinforced this. We are qualifying tannins, especially if you're going through the whole MS adventure, as medium, medium plus, high, but we're quantifying them, but we're also qualifying them. Are they pleasantly drying? Are they soft? Pinot Noir versus the Barbera, right? Are they astringent? Are they, unpleasantly gritty, etc.? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and release the aroma, and you don't have to swirl it to death. You can just turn the glass. Actually, I learned this from Tim. This will do the trick as the wine's evaporating off the sides, or give it a gentle whirl. I usually close my eyes when I put my nose in the glass, switch my brain off, and make sure I'm smelling out of both nostrils. And what I get out of this is just this very generous upfront expression of fruit, and complexity. So here we go. Without taking it on the palate, the black fruit dominates to me, but there is red and blue in here as well. It is perfectly ripe. And I'm thinking, black currant, cassis, black raspberry, black plum, a little bit of blueness going on, and then ripe red raspberry, red plum. Plum always implies a richness to me beyond berries. And in terms of florality, maybe some dried violets. It's not a primary component, but it's in there. I love the fact that we talk about florality or floral aromas in red wines. We didn't use too much. There is an earthiness to this wine that's coming across more like organic earthiness. And all of you who are gardening with a frenzy at the moment know that smell when you're digging up dirt, and it contains dried leaves. Also, there is a little bit of inorganic or rocky quality to the smell that reminds me of anybody old enough to have, sharpened pencils. Graphite. I still do that because I like them. They make me feel happy when I use them, and they help me collect my thoughts. There is an herbal element, but also a little bit of that pyrazine. But what I'm doing is I'm describing primary aromatics on this wine, and as my brain catches it and moves it out of the way, then I'm smelling aromatics that are not as dominant, but are defined. There is, I think I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate, but boy, the nose is certainly expressive, intriguing. There's a little bit of, you could be inclined to sort of quickly define it as earth, but it's not. It's more like what I call it, the clean animal smell, like a beautiful leather Coach bag smell, right? So hold that thought. I haven't bought a Coach bag since they were affordable, but hey, one can dream. And on the palate, truth. I'm not driving anywhere in Detroit tonight. I swallowed a little. So the attack is lush and delicious. And I was really inspired to swallow a little bit of the wine. It is mirroring, well, what did you call it, Tim, when it drives along, you know, what the nose sets you up for, but it really is reflective of what I described on the nose. There is, to confirm, perfectly right. Dominantly black fruit for me with a little bit of blue, but certainly some red in there. So you might want to ask yourself, monovarietal or blend? You know, not a good or bad thing, just is. I get a little bit more of that inorganic and organic earth on the palate. There's the graphite, there's the garden characteristic. This is a complex wine. I mean, it looks young, and certainly the fruit is primal, but it's got layers already to it, which speaks to the integrity of both wine growing and all on wine making. Let's go to the science, to quote my colleagues. The acidity is actually medium plus. It's very interesting. I can feel the alcohol in my chest, so I would say medium plus as well. The acidity is pleasantly refreshing, and the tannin is medium plus, and I would call it quite drying, but it does not shut the flavor of the wine down. So I wouldn't call them gritty or astringent, but quite firm. What are our delectable options here? And by the way, oak, which I didn't mention, is certainly in there, but it is not dominant. It's not sitting on the wine. I'm getting like cocoa powder and dark baking spices, but very well integrated and certainly, you know, melted into the fruit. We've got Cabernet Sauvignon blend, Tempranillo blend, Malbec blend. You could consider Merlot blend, you know, which one is driving the SUV. I just got a hybrid, so it's it's in my brain. Cabernet Sauvignon, certainly black fruits dominant. Tempranillo blend, you know, would pull you more into dried red fruit, and probably, possibly, especially if you were talking classic Rioja, a significant amount of more obvious oak. Malbec, you know, we, you know, got a little love affair going in South America, especially with Argentina. And I find, for me, that the fruit tends to be more blue, the florality more pronounced, and the tannins a little bit softer. And regions, we've got France, which for both Cabernet and Malbec would be Bordeaux or possibly Cahors if we were talking, you know, otherwise. Spain for Tempranillo, California, largely for Cabernet Sauvignon, subtext Merlot, Malbec, you know, not so much as a dominant varietal, and Argentina explains itself. Shall we get on? You guys are getting on your teeny little plane. I'm drinking my third glass of
Yeah, and I
champagne.
think it might be worth, Madeline, I can see here that even though you can see in the results, France getting 36% and Spain getting 21%, California getting 29% and Argentina getting 14%. People are bifurcated between old world and new world. So
and
as
I
we
love
get
that. I love that because it's not always clearly defined. It's not an on and off switch. What is it? On, off, the whatchamacallit movies, you know what I'm talking about. I'm doing
Karate Kid.
Yes,
Wax
the
on,
Karate
wax
Kid,
off.
wax on, wax off. So we're getting on our plane. In the meantime, I would say there is significant earthiness to this wine, both in the form of organic and inorganic earth. That graphite is dominant on the finish. You know, the forest floor gardening characteristic of it. The integrated oak, new oak does not sit on this wine. The complexity, we are indeed, drum roll, in Bordeaux. We are in the left bank. We are in actually one of my favorite places in the world for, well, certainly Cabernet, Pauillac, which happens to be, I just found out today, the largest city in Bordeaux. And a lot of it was its proximity to the ports, which, you know, made it grow in the years when, you know, planes didn't exist and boats were very important. So this is, we're calling it a Cabernet dominant blend, but I will tell you the truth. Their vineyards are planted to almost 50-50 Cabernet versus Merlot, or not versus, alongside Merlot, which, and it is the second label, Tour Pibran from Chateau Pibran. It is owned by AXA, a company that is quite rich in their estates, including Pichon Longueville Baron, fondly called Pichon Baron. It is also adjacent to Mouton, Ponte Canet, and Grand Puy-Lacoste. I mean, hello, this is a hell of a neighborhood. And this is, look at that gorgeous low-lying chateau, if you will. This was established in the early 1900s, so kind of a baby for Bordeaux. It was purchased by AXA in the 1980s. They sunk a ton of money into it. And my
shows.
battery is running low. So if I go away, I thought I was plugged in and I am, but I apologize. But I will tell you that it is a great example of a blend from the left bank where Cabernet is dominant because what? It is, to me, the little black elephant in the room. You know, it tends to overtake red fruited grapes. They have replaced other grape varieties with Franc, and I think they're including that that in the blend more. About half new oak, and it's made at Pichon-Baron. So you have an example of a team that is cosmic class, making an estate that you may not have heard of, but is a stunning value. And if you haven't seen, by the way, Jane Anson's book, Inside Bordeaux, I strongly suggest it. By the way, Pied-Baron has more clay in the soil and favors Merlot, which punches up the acidity, right? Remember the right bank clay, Merlot? And that's one of the reasons this wine is refreshing. I think those of you who are studying and want, you know, examinable wines, you can memorize this baby. It's a beautiful example of Bordeaux from a killer vintage, 18. It could be a 19 because they're, you know, it's a duo that are both A+. 18 is a little more, I think, forward, and 19 is a little bit harder. Not unlike 15 and 16, you know, going back a few years. But thank you for letting me finish up with this beautiful wine because it's so pretty. Tim's book, yay.
Absolutely.
I'm disappearing so Tim can talk and I can plug in my computer.
I just want to say thank you to all three of you. This was a great, I learned so much every single time. I know that our audience feels the same way. Evan, Tim, and Madeline and I will stay on for the next half an hour, and people can come on video if you want to. We'll pull the panel up and all that good stuff. But in the meantime, just a reminder, here's the webinar QR code if you're not a subscriber and want to get on to get the webinar kit for 145A. It's going to be on August 18th, and of course, a recording will be available. And on September 28th, I'm so excited. Barbara from our team and Tim have worked out a course that you guys can take with Tim. We're calling it a message in the bottle tutorial. You have a version that's with the book. If you don't already have the book, you need to get the book, or without the book. And so for those of you who are subscribers of MTW, and for those of you who are amazingly here on this webinar, we're putting a code here called TGVIP10. So your Tim's VIP for a 10% off. It's otherwise $175. That includes the book. That's a $30 value with the course and with the wines, of course. Everything here comes with the wine. And when you book it, we will make sure that you get, and only the ones who book it will get the Zoom link to Tim's course to go with the wine. You'll have an opportunity to talk to Tim and ask questions of Tim after he presents. So this is a great opportunity. We're doing it at 5 p.m. We're not sure that this is the best time. We're just taking a stab at it so that people on the East Coast and West Coast can do it. I will say that at this point, we're thinking of this as one live session, and it will be available for you as a recording if you want to revise. However, I'm not sure how many live sessions we have. So if you definitely want to do a live session, book on this first one on September 28th.